wait. And baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, the Toronto FC fan show. I'm Mike Newell, and it's another offseason, y'all. Again, it is the most, stop if you heard this before, the most important offseason in Toronto FC history. Yes, we are back. It's offseason time. It's time to idly speculate based off a few words and a bunch of word salad from TFC executives, from our head coach, and of course from Captain Jonathan Osorio. We're going to be talking about the end of season press availability held late last week at BMO Training Ground. Some interesting things actually that came out of it. Excuse me. And we'll react to some of that. We'll preface by saying we don't have any clips this week. We hope to provide some context into some of the things that have been said. And look, great friends of ours, John Molinaro, Neil Davidson, James Sharman in the press have gone through some of this as well, but we'll give our own takes on some of these items as well. With me, as always, Michael Singh and Jeffrey P. Nesker. Guys, how have you been? It feels like a while since we've rode together in the saddle. It's been a while since the end of the season. It feels like. How you all doing? How is TFC offseason now treating you?
The most important offseason in franchise history. I love that. Yeah, so far so good. I think we should talk about the most pressing item on our agenda, though, and that's that fresh haircut that Mike Newell's
Oh my
rocking.
God, it's so fresh. It's so fresh. It's
Is
so
that
clean.
a
It's
summer
unbelievable.
haircut? You trying to keep the good weather around or what?
Well, here's the thing. We're getting a little bit of a late summer here, a little last blast of the good vibe weather. So you gotta enjoy it while you can, because Mordor's coming, and it's gonna you leave in darkness, you come home in darkness. So you gotta keep it a little fresh once in a while.
Sounds
Also,
like
it's just
TFC.
hard when your hair gets, I don't know, there's black people listen to this. When your hair starts to get really high and it just gets really hard to like moisturize. Like you get like a dry scalp very quickly, and then you feel like you're washing it too much. So like, sometimes you gotta level set and then you bring it back up with a fresh crop.
I don't,
Right.
but I'll pretend like I do.
Didn't you start the year getting like a haircut a week? Like your hair stopped growing. You're like, hey, I just get haircuts now all the time.
I do
that
every
you?
2 weeks, and I'm actually like my eyes twitching because I'm not able to get one this week just because of timing constraints, and it's keeping me up at night. So thanks for the reminder, Jeff. And
You're
Mike's
welcome.
Newell's
You're welcome.
fresh
We
fade.
both have to
Listen,
have
I appreciate
twitchy
a fresh.
eyes. It is-
I appreciate a fresh cut.
It is the
Absolutely.
dustiest, hottest place in the world. Like there's just 10 years.
Let's
of
also
dust
talk
circulating
about.
around
Let's
here.
also. There's also a very important item that we need to talk about this week. Is you can
hostage
probably
video
see for
background?
longtime listeners, if you're watching this live on YouTube, you're probably looking at Jeffrey P. Nesker's background and being like, "Wow, that looks like Mike Newell when he started on the show in 2023." All of a sudden, the roles have
switching
reversed.
places.
We're
Yep,
switching
yep.
places, but we're not really switching places because you're coming my way.
Exactly. This is it. This is the last one you're gonna be doing from this location. Come next Wednesday, I won't be living here anymore. So take it in, everybody. There you
Yeah,
go.
absolutely. On his way to the hammer, where he's going to end up converting to a forge person. You kind of already are in it, but
I already
We're gonna have to do Forge Till I Die. We're gonna
That's
have to.
Village, yeah. Yeah, we're gonna have to put an asterisk
Nope.
on the top of Toronto Till I
Yeah.
Die. Toronto Till I Die, or until the housing prices improve. Otherwise,
Toronto till I can afford it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right,
Toronto
let's
till
not
they
get depressed
close
as
every
more
bus
than we
stop
already are
losing.
going to be on this show anyway. It was the annual locker clean out, press availability.
That's the best comment in the world. I'm
yeah,
sorry,
it is.
Aaron. That's the best comment in the world.
You're gonna regret saying
I
this, but
might,
JPN,
yeah.
you're a little quiet.
No, it's okay. We'll keep me quiet, you know.
I think we'll all regret you saying that, Aaron. All right?
Yeah, I
Hold
think
on,
so. I think
let me
so.
mess around, but anyway, go ahead.
4 speakers this time around. A little less than last year. I think last year, obviously, look, a lot of people made a fact that there were like, look, there was a picture of 2 journalists. There were more than 2 journalists last year, but it wasn't that much more. More people in the crowd this time around, but definitely what I call a more curated experience for our reporter friends this time around. But some interesting things that came out of this, even though, a lot of this ends up being, like I said, kind of word salad, dancing around certain questions that get asked because you can't either provide context or won't. But again, the first opportunity for a lot of fans to hear from Keith Pelly, the new MLSE CEO. And he did drop some interesting nuggets, and no, not the Doug Ford was a striker and was
What an
actually
opening,
kind of
man!
good.
Holy crap!
Like, who was expecting that?
Yeah, no.
I thought the guy
But-
was off his rocker at that point.
yeah.
Were
That
you
was
all
very-
thinking
like-
who it was going to be? Because he's like long, luscious blonde locks. I'm like, not Alexi Lalas. And then I'm just trying to think of all the bad haircuts in early MLS, and
Like,
like,
Diego
I'm
Forlan
stumped.
came to mind. I'm like, how'd
yeah,
you play
Diego Forlan
Forlan?
totally came to mind. Yeah. But Doug Ford, never in a million years.
You just ruined that for me, because now you're thinking Diego Forlan hair and Doug Ford. But beyond that, he did drop some nuggets. And I think one of the themes that we got out of this, amongst it, not just from Keith Pelly, but from all of the speakers, that include Jason Hernandez, that include John Herdman and Jonathan Osorio, was around this concept of identity. We've talked about it on the show. Sometimes that word can feel like it's a bit nebulous in terms of like, what does that really mean in a soccer team or in a pro football club? But it seems very prevalent. It seems very prevalent on the minds of those running Toronto FC right now. And I've said it. I think we've all said it, right? We just have no idea what this team is about, and they're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what this team is about. And I wanted to get both of your perspectives on sort of the emphasis in this end of season press conference around identity and the different thoughts. Because I don't think I think it was cohesive in the sense that they didn't feel like they had one, but how they get there felt a little bit different. What do you guys think in terms of what you think where is this sort of identity research project going in terms of the off season? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Well, first, I don't want to forget. I'm so sorry for how often I interrupted, especially at the outs. I got flamed on the YouTube comment machine. Mikey was just trying to tell us. Mikey Newell was just trying to tell us how much he liked The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, and I wouldn't let him. If you listen back to the intro, he's like, "This is my favorite." Nope, not letting him. No, nope, not letting him. I have a million things to say, and all he wanted to tell us was how much he liked the song. Would not let him.
I don't share things about myself.
Such a piece of ass. I'm really sorry. The other thing is you said it yourself. I laughed my ass off. I've listened to that intro like 100 times. I'm like, wow, I'm such a dick. Like, I am such.
You should
like,
clip that and make that our new intro.
I might. You said it yourself. Word salad, right? It's this club has no identity. Yeah, it does. We lose horribly. That's our identity, right? Like, it's not that we don't have an identity. It's that we don't have a winning identity, right? So it's more lip service. Now, I like this idea that the club's not going to be inactive, but I mean, this is grasping at straws. Like, what is the only identity that we care about is winning, right? That's your identity. If your identity is cool, we wear nice clothes, but we lose all the time. Well, we're there already. Like, what are the options on identity here? A winning one and a losing one. But, far be it for me to speculate. Everybody in the universe is, Chris brought it up right now. That 75 show rate comment from Pelly was a really interesting one. That was my biggest takeaway too. One, that they're tracking this sort of thing, to how fallible their tracking is. It's a nice round number, 75%. So I think it's a rounding issue, but this idea that TFC are paying attention to not just ticket sales, but who's actually coming after the money is exchanged hands suggests metrics that I don't think they were doing. So that was a surprise. And then of course the the often expressed or re-expressed idea that nothing's off the table and people sort of spinning their wheels, taking that to mean Herdman's out of a job, Lorenzo Insigne is getting bought out, etc., ad infinitum. That was a lot more definitive than I expected. I mean, you open with identity, which is this ephemeral, vacuous nonsense, and then you go into some really specific things, which I thought was really interesting. Turtz brings up the traffic comments, which I thought were also very interesting. I'm not sure what kind of success TFC is going to have with the mighty Apple TV south of the border, considering already the kind of BS that Canadian MLS clubs have to deal with. But bring it on. If he's promising more afternoon games, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to just touch on the afternoon games really quickly, I mean, I think I was pretty clear last week or 2 weeks ago that I feel strongly that it's really beneficial to Toronto FC to explore that angle. Look, you're not getting any more 7:30 Apple TV subscriptions from Toronto FC. The MLS 360 show, I'll say it doesn't need to include Toronto FC. Right, it can get by without including Toronto FC,
Fair.
and I think you'll actually benefit more from having Toronto FC at a game slot where you can showcase it more to, in my opinion, a more loyal local audience as opposed to a bigger audience. And you can even make the argument you can tap into a bigger audience a little bit more when you stagger it, right? If every game's at 7:30 and 8:30 and 9:30, then like why is one dedicated MLS fan in Philadelphia going to choose to watch a Toronto game over a Philadelphia game, right?
Yeah.
So I love the idea for a lot of different reasons, but more than anything, it's the afternoon games. I think it was honestly synonymous with Toronto FC for so long, and how nice a day could be, and being outdoors in the outdoor stand, and the only real outdoor stadium for a major professional sports team in Toronto. Obviously, you got the Jays a little bit, but you still have the dome there. It's a different type of experience, and I think fans can truly appreciate and explore more. Yeah, a couple of things off the bat there, Mike. The first one being only 4 people speaking at the press conference, I think, is an important note. Like, everything the club does it's very calculated, especially when it comes to press and media. So that was not not obviously not intentional. There's meaning behind it, right? You're no longer going to get, for TFC not to put out Bernadeschi, for them not to put out Insigne. I think that kind of sends a message.
Sure does.
The second thing I think worth pointing out was, some of Keith Pelly's comments. The word, identity and culture thrown around a lot, right? And you think about it and what that means. So TFC did have a culture, in my opinion. It used to. It was to be the trailblazers of Major League Soccer, to be the club that did things first, to be the most ambitious, to be able to go out and break barriers and boundaries in Major League Soccer, and to set the tone for the league. In a lot of ways, they did that throughout 2015 is when it really started. 2016, and then you go through out the years, and you get to 2020, and you get to that point where you're making a decision between Greg Vanney and Ali Curtis, and they decide to not go, which obviously was a mistake, not go the Greg Vanney route. They flip that identity. They try to become a Red Bull club, and obviously we know how that transpired with the players that TFC had. But then they still, in a way, maintain that identity, right? They go out and they get Jefferson Soteldo, who was at the time, a different type of profile, but one they thought was super ambitious. This was the captain of Santos, one of the biggest, most historic clubs in the world, the number 10 from Santos, same number as Pel, right? Super young, up and coming player. Like, they had ambition there. And then, of course, what I think was, at the time, by far the biggest moves in Major League Soccer to date was the signings of Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi, both of those players. And that was ambitious. That was them trying to set the bar really high in Major League Soccer, change the way that people looked at the league and try and tap into things a little bit differently. It didn't work. And that's where the identity was lost, was because it didn't work. And because they, quite frankly, they got the Lorenzo Insigne signing wrong, right? That's where you see a club culture fully collapse. And then from the top of it is someone who's no longer in their position, in Bill Manning, who um, allowed the culture to get to where it got. And there's a lot of different factors into why it transpired and how it got there, but that's the biggest reason, I'd say.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, it's just I'm gonna sort of deep dive into your statement there, right? Because we like that identity, right? That was a great identity, even in the bad old days. And I'll agree with you. You know, I said TF, there's two sides to identity. I was wrong, and I hate being binary. I like your encapsulation, the ambitious club, the trendsetter, right? Doesn't wouldn't his statement then give us the fear? Because if our identity was tied into that ambition and it failed, don't his words suggest that this new identity will have nothing to do with the one that we love so much for our soccer club?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and for I guess I should be clear. I don't necessarily think that's what they were talking about when they were talking about club identity and club
Yeah.
culture, or maybe less so club culture, but club identity. They were talking more so about a football philosophy. And they brought up the Philadelphia Union, who in a way adapted the Red Bull philosophy, and they pay, when Philadelphia comes to town, exactly the type of high pressing, aggressive team that you're going to be facing. They're also a team that invests a ton in their academy and brings through young players. Obviously you got the Red Bull philosophy. I thought LAFC was actually an interesting one. Not sure I necessarily agree with that, but they again use LAFC as an example of a club that, when they face LAFC, this is how they're going to play. Fair. TFC, for a number of different reasons, don't have that. And I think the biggest reason, again, I'll circle back to it, and they don't have that because
He's laughing about the Arby's comment. I can tell. Anyway, go ahead.
well, they don't have that because what they invested in didn't work. And if it did work, they would have it, quite frankly, the identity that they're looking for. And again, the biggest thing though is what they're circling back to is their identity, regardless of who's there and which players on the pitch and who's the manager or whatever. They said that like 5 times. It shouldn't change, and it would change because their identity. I get to their point. If I'm talking about Lorenzo Insigne failing,
Yeah,
Lorenzo Insigne would be the identity of this club, right? And we don't want, or TFC doesn't want that. They want it to transcend a player. So, the identity really fell in the back of Lorenzo Insigne, and it was not one who could shoulder that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
it's funny because there's a lot of people that are reading that exact thing, that all of the identity talk, all of it was basically thinly veiled barbs at the great mistake. I don't think so, but I think we're getting to it, boys. And again, I'm interrupting Mikey Newell. He's about to tell us how much he loves the Gambler, but at the end of the day, I think the difficulty we're having discerning what the hell Keith Pelly was talking about is because it was just dripping with subtext. And I think that's why it's rife for such speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I think partly that's it, right? Like you put a lot on Lorenzo and you put a lot on the DPs, and it didn't work. And you're right, Mike, in that sense. I do also think that, and this is where sort of this looking forward perspective in terms of Marco Neppi and the work he's done, and they're trying to bring him in and to work with Jason Hernandez. In what capacity, I don't know, because you already have a technical director technically. Well, not technically, you do have a TD. But this idea of, I think Toronto FC, how they're going to play. How they're going to line up, right? You know with a John Herdman team what you're going to see on the pitch. You're going to see three center backs and two wing backs that try to play high and aggressively, and you try to close down aggressively. You kind of know that. I think what the secret sauce that's kind of missing is, what does this team kind of stand for? And what really struck me from all the comments throughout the day was from Jonathan Osorio, actually, and what he said about, over the last couple of years, and you mentioned it off the top, Jeffrey, about ticketing and about show rates, and about, this is stuff that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? And his comment around, Bill Manning coming up to end of season press conferences and, sometimes mid-season press conferences and talking about season ticket numbers and how well they're doing and whether the renewal rates and things like that. And like, good to know. Like, obviously you want to understand the club is healthy from a business perspective, and look, DP signings are a part of the business too. But I get his point around the vibe of that is, you're more worried about putting butts in the seats. You're more worried about, merchandising opportunities and branding opportunities and marketing exercises to the Italian community or for XYZ market, instead of winning football matches, right? And I mean, some people can argue that if that's true or not. I get it. I think a lot of fans have that sense, and for Keith to come up and sort of mention it, but also say, like, I have no idea what the numbers are. Now, that's partly because he's probably still relatively new in his role, but also the sense that this club really needs to focus on winning first. It needs to have a mentality around winning football matches, because then that takes care of the business, right? That's kind of a conversation that's being had at a certain baseball team down the road, right? Like, so, from that perspective, that's sort of around this conversation around what is a culture and a identity of this team around winning football matches. What is a winning mentality for Toronto FC? The things I bring up each week is like, what is a Toronto FC player, right? What are the values, the core values of a Toronto FC player that you want to see in a signing? I think they have them. I think they have an idea. There's just not, we don't know all of them. But to Keith Bell's point, I think when maybe Neil Davidson asked this question, or it might have been John Molinaro asked this question, but he kind of threw it back and said, like, well, do you know what the identity is? Can you tell me what it is? And I think it was John being like, no. Well, he's like, well, if you don't know and the fans don't know, then we got work to do, because clearly we don't know either, right? Yeah. And that was, I think that was the thing out of this whole sort of identity conversation that struck me. And of course, Jason Hernandez, like you mentioned before, might bring up Philly and LAFC in terms of playing style and things like that. That we've brought up on the show before, but that just sort of other piece around sort of what is a winning culture. That is sort of a new piece that I gleaned out of this.
Yeah, I would say it all loops into one another. So when I think of an identity, you think of Barcelona and you think of tiki taka, right? And obviously that resonates in Spain as a whole. And then you think about Ajax and you think about Total Football and how that, obviously they've established that identity. You think about the Red Bull philosophy and how Red Bull has all of its clubs around the world playing this certain philosophy. That's what I think of when I think of identity of a football club. Like, you want your academy to your second team to your first team all under that same type of principle, and it extends beyond the manager. So like, when TFC hired Chris Armas, right? They hired a manager and then tried to adapt their entire philosophy around that manager, right? It should be the opposite.
Yes.
You should hire a manager that comes in and complements your existing philosophy. That was the biggest mistake I think Toronto FC made.
And they've been kind of going down the same path since.
Over and over and over in a spiral. And I think we've talked about it at the time. It was just you're trying to fit square pegs into round holes there, and it just
Mhm.
it was that decision signified a greater issue, I think, beyond the club, and I think that's what Keith Belly came out and said. Now, as I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more. I'm so as let's just say a Toronto FC fan, I've been so sick of hearing the same kind of stuff over and over and over. It's like, okay, what's going to be different about this rebuild,
Mhm.
right?
Well, I think this is
Because
the first time they've really said rebuild. I think they try to avoid the word the last couple of
they
years.
they have, but they eventually it comes out. Like I
Yeah.
remember Bob
Mhm.
was trying to avoid it for a really long time, and eventually it came out. What's going to be different? Okay, first you have Keith Pelly at the helm, right? Okay, we got a completely new CEO of MLSC. There's no president at Toronto FC. You got Bill Manning out, who's been here obviously throughout the entire time, and now you have a completely different uh, perspective of the club, which I think is something that was needed. Um, what does a full rebuild entail? And for me, you cannot do a full rebuild if you bring Lorenzo Insigne back next season.
Mhm.
That's what I've been saying.
Right? You
I
cannot
mean,
call it a
I
full rebuild if Lorenzo Insigne returns to Toronto FC next season. You can't.
No.
and considering how careful the club is with their language, and considering how much they've avoided the term rebuild, and then they came out and said full rebuild, I think it's fair for TFC Live to be set into a frothy moose over that. Anyway, I've been sitting on these comments forever, and here we go. So, you know, at the end of the day, uh, I always think that art and commerce make better bedfellows than them on their own, right? And that comes from Filmland, right? It's easier, it's way harder to be the Beatles than the Rolling Stones, right? And the Beatles deserve all their acclaim over the Stones because they wrote pop songs that you don't even have to know English to get stuck in your craw for the rest of your life, right? But you don't have so much of the excuses coming from TFC are ignoring the fact that sports is different than art, right? We're all guessing when we release a movie whether it's going to be a success or not. But sports is kind of like math. Either you have the answer, you don't, and that answer is you win or you lose, right? There's an absolute there that isn't subjective, right? Like you win a game or you lose a game, and it doesn't matter what I thought about it, right? Like I'm not the film reviewer. So I find this circular language that's going on with TFC about looking for identity and all this ephemera. No, you're in the weeds. It's about winning or losing. That's the beauty of sports. That's the definitive beauty of sports, and that's more a rant than a question. My question to you, Mike Newell, and I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier, is how easy is this whole, he's coming in with like this next level stuff, right? So we're not getting the Bill Manning like season ticket renewals were 89%. We're getting new language now, right? Like this second level of metric says that our show rate is 75. So we're kind of seeing how the sausage is made a little bit, right? Is it as impressive as I think it is, or is it just more window dressing BS? Like is it just one extra level of the same document? Or I'll let you go there. I'll let you cook.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, right? I think one, it is a little bit of dressing, right?
Okay.
However, I think it is somewhat, I don't know if significant is the right word, but that's the word I'll use. Because he kind of followed up by saying, at the end of the day, though, and I'm just quoting here, thank you, Tom Nightingale, at Waking the Red. At the end of the day, we are 35, 75, 31 over the past 4 seasons. We've not made the playoffs. This should be a storied franchise like it was in 2017. It's time to rebuild it. And that's what we're in the midst of doing. I don't have all the answers at this particular time because we're in the midst of it, but it has started. And as I said, the only positive factor about missing the playoffs is that we could start the rebuild already, right? So I think what he's saying sort of veiled behind, our show rates right now are only 75%. That's not great. From a business perspective, no, that's not great. But what he's also saying is that winning cures that. People show up when you win, right? Tickets become more valuable when you're winning, right? That is the fact. And I think that, sorry, just to wrap up, I just think that
sorry. love the
what he's
gambler.
kind of saying here is that the focus on this team for now, is going to be about building a winning culture and trying to bring wins back in the building, because what it will end up doing in the end is helping all those business metrics and things like that when you start talking about show rates and renewal rates and how many are actually in the house, and are you papering the house with free tickets compared to actually paid tickets and things like that.
Exactly. These numbers are so ephemeral. And guys, I'm trying so hard. You have no idea how hard I'm trying not to interrupt today. It's crazy. I must look like I'm like taking a shit because I'm trying so hard. I just feel like it's just numbers pulled out of the ether. Like, Toronto is an impossible city to get around in, right? BMO is by Liberty Village, where, a car is, you're basically living in it because you can't get off the roads in the next 48 hours, right? So I'm just wondering, is like show rates then going to turn into, well, a war on traffic in the TTC, right? Like,
I don't think he means traffic. That's not what he means. That's not.
Well,
but that's
he
not what
used
he
traffic.
means.
He talked about traffic in the same breath to talk about why we need day games, right? It just, they're plucking it like it. We're all saying the same thing. All of this BS means nothing. Just win. And it'll work itself out. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah,
like,
but
it couldn't be simpler than that, right?
But I think
just
when
effing win,
right? But when you think about things like that, I don't want to spend a ton of time on show rate because, like, in the end, to everybody else, it really doesn't matter that much. But
are you at liberty to tell us what the Jays show rates are? Are they?
No, I am not.
No?
Okay. The end of the day is that,
Oops,
like,
I tried, fellas.
Yeah. The thing with show rate and those kind of things is just, if people see the tickets as valuable and they paid the money, they'll find a way to get to the stadium, right? If you're winning, they'll find a way. I agree. Right.
I
and
agree.
Right now, people have no incentive to find a way. Right. If it's you're losing, and like, look, this team, if you look at it statistically, it's one of the third worst goal rate in the Eastern Conference. It gave up the fifth most goals in MLS, I believe. From when you think about this team, if they go down a goal, you're like, ugh, this game might be over already, right? And I think that speaks to a sense of this culture piece around whether or not this team has fight, whether it's going to come back. We saw it at the early part of the season. We saw the makings of what it could potentially be. And this is why I'm not as down, as much as it sucked to miss the playoffs this year and you're frustrated and the second half of the season went horribly. There are little nuggets there. And I think they tried to bring that out in the press conference. In terms of, like, there has been incremental improvements, but right now it's just not enough to really carry you anywhere. And the question is, can you take those monumental gains and make them really big steps next year to get yourself into the playoffs? And then you start talking about, okay, can we be a contender? Things like that. Sorry, Mike, you wanted to jump in.
No, I think it's well said. And what spurred to mind was, I was actually surprised when I heard, I think Keith Pelly first said it, Neil Davidson, was, we're in a full rebuild at Toronto FC. That actually caught me off guard. I was like, whoa, like, okay, very interesting. I thought we were already in a full rebuild at Toronto FC. Why do we have to come back and announce it? Because, like, this year, regardless of how it ended, it did feel like progress. But to me, in the way that, I've taken some time to really think about what that means, I think there's levels to this, and they're trying to set the bar really, really high for Toronto Football Club. And when I say this, I mean, like, not necessarily just the first team winning. I think what they're trying to put together here and piece together here is a real entity in football, and one that can, not just put together buy a good first team and put together some really world-class players, but from top to bottom, we've talked about this at length on this show about how much this club, quite frankly, sucks at producing local talent, and how there's so much local talent that's just gone through the grips of their hands.
They produce local talent. They just go play for other teams.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's producing local talent. I mean, this idea that they're all gonna magically get a spot in the starting 11, or they were unsuccessfully developed, I think is awfully binary, right? That's still producing talent. It's all right to be butthurt about it, but it's still, if they're playing in other MLS squads, we produce talent, just not for our first team.
Yeah, no,
right?
I think the issue isn't that they're not playing for us, is that we fail to identify those players and get them on a pathway towards the first team, right? I know you're not going to get everybody, that's true,
Yeah.
but this club has not been great at retaining and identifying talent and getting them successfully through the pipeline to the
100%.
first team.
Aside
the issue.
from Ozo, who's the most successful homegrown player to play for Toronto FC?
Recently, like, or ever?
Yeah,
because there's two
recently or
answers to
ever.
that.
Yeah. Ash?
Okay.
I would say
yeah.
there's two, Daniil and Ash, because
Yeah,
Ash had a long
absolutely.
career and he
Mark
played for you
Anthony
for a long
Kay.
time and lifted a trophy. Daniil was your first sale. Realistically, probably Jaden Nelson, because he's probably the sale that got you the most money. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are we basing that on, right? Are we basing that on who had a great career, who got where?
I'm going to discount Shaft because he had a college career before he came to TFC.
Yeah, he's not
People
really
are people are discounting Oso because he was kind of a baked cake when he came to TFC, right?
He wasn't really a homegrown product.
I mean, if we're discounting Shaft for college ball, I'm discounting Oso for Uruguay.
I agree.
Right? It's got to be somebody that like was plucked out of,
Anyways,
yeah.
so that's kind of what I'm getting to in terms of the big picture. Like, this can be like, we can talk about, okay, first team put on a winning product on the field, and you guys are right. Like, you put on a winning product on the field, so many other things get elevated as a result, right? It's a foundation, and right now that foundation's fractured. However,
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, just, I think they want to insulate that foundation more than ever at this point in time. So that, I think that's what they want to work towards. And listen, it just because they throw around the term identity and they want to define that identity, it doesn't guarantee anything. Like, you think about the New York Red Bulls, they have an identity. It's very clear. They also have never won an MLS Cup,
but they haven't missed the playoffs in like ever.
They have.
I'm sure their fans are super happy about that. Like, the consistent disappointment of going out in the first round.
What's their track record in the playoffs too? Right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, very true.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. It's brutal.
So,
oh my god!
Like, again, like, just because you identify an identity doesn't mean success. That's another big takeaway for me. Is like, okay, we can throw around this buzzword and we can get all excited about it because we're saying all the right things, but at the end of the day, they've got to execute it in a way that hasn't been done here before. And I wonder if that's doable.
Yeah, and I would question around sort of, trying to bring in Marco Neppi to help consult on this. If you're a TFC fan, you hear outside consultant coming to TFC and your skin crawls a little bit because you start thinking about the past, and the TFC have gone down this path before. This is not new. The whole bringing over a...
I think that's an important thing because we got... I mean, the first time we did it, we were very naive. Fool me once. I don't think we're as naive this time.
No. I don't think you're getting the snake oil salesman like Jurgen Klinsmann again. Like that. That's not Marco Neppi. But at the same time,
this is more like an Aaron Vinter kind of situation. You just got to hope that the front office listens to the guy that put that Bayern roster together, right?
Yeah, and I think ideally you hire him, right? You're able to hire him. I don't know if he'd come, but
I do think it's the same issue as Aaron Vinter, where they come in and they're like, "All right, you signed this, this, and this," and they're like, actually salary cap, actually homegrown rule,
he knows.
U22," and he's like, "What?" And then their brain explodes. They're like, "No, at Bayern we just buy the guy," and you're like, "No, actually here you've got to buy this guy to get to that guy," and he's aware. Being aware is a lot different than doing it. You know what I mean? Which is where I'm
fair, and I think that's where you have Jason Hernandez to help, right? And that's why he wants the two of them to work specifically
100%.
together, because Jason Hernandez has an incredible knowledge of the MLS rulebook, and the data wonk things that you need to know in terms of signing players in this league and getting them into contracts. And there's a couple things I actually want to touch on in terms of his comments and thinking about obviously the big thing for him right now is going to be obviously these 13 contracts that are up for option And then the second thing, which I think is the most important thing, is to figure out what sort of DP model, if that's sort of what we want to call it right now, is TFC going to take? Because that will then kind of dictate the strategy that you use in this offseason to have the most important offseason in club history. So I think we're all agreed, and I think most of the listeners are agreed, that we probably think TFC should go down the 2 DP for U22.
If they
route.
don't, oh my goodness me, I'll be hopping mad, because you're leaving 2 million in Garber bucks on the table for that reason alone.
Yeah, like I think Jason Hernandez said it best in his presser. He said the 3DP model, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, is typically for teams who need that one extra piece to put them over the top. And I think TFC need a little bit more than one extra piece right now to help support them.
Yeah.
So you think that they may go 3?
No. I think they go the 2 DP and 4 U22 route. But again, I don't want to like revisit this, but the club's track record at signing U22 players is
abysmal.
Not great.
So again,
sign them to 1-year deals.
Jason Hernandez said it. The cap space is only as good as how you use it. And Toronto City have as much cap space that they've probably had in the last 5 years, 6 years, which is exciting.
Yeah,
but there's a but. Like there's this whole big rejig in terms of how they might use that salary in that open space occurring right before the start of the season, when it seemed like at least at this point a year ago we were starting to do that process already, and now we're redoing that process. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was also a question that posed to both Jason Hernandez and to John Herdman in terms of, like, we're talking about rebuilding and culture and in identity. And the question was kind of posed to both of them, being like, wait, didn't you hire John Herdman to essentially change that culture? So why are we having a conversation around culture a year after he's hired?
I mean, you answered your own question there, because
I'm asking you guys, right? Because I haven't a thought, but I would love to get your thoughts on this.
I don't think it was enough. I think, when your back's against the wall, when push came to shove on this season, there's a great many things Herdman can do well, and there's quite a few holes in his suit of armor. And some of those are going to be addressed. I mean, Jason's saying it here because John ain't sticking around. I mean, are we going to pull the Band-Aid off that? Because I agree with some of this speculation. The language was too specific to not have the Pandora's box of maybe Herdman's not long for this world at TFC. In addition to our Lorenzo Insigne's on the next plane to Napoli sandwich. So what do you think, boys? Do you think that language was also directed towards John Herdman? Like, I just, the word full rebuild has to, when it's thrown out this judiciously, it has to mean something. I don't know where I'm going to put this, but I wrote it down. Hey, remember when Herdman was starting, how quick this club, including Manning, was to throw the Bradleys under the bus in ways that were very unsubtle? This is a bit more subtle, but I feel that same kind of polite distancing happening from the tippy top. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I don't know. I think John was even asked this about the academy to the first team, and how if there's like a connection. John said he was made very clear when he first started that there wouldn't be a connection. And the way that I interpret it when you talk about club culture is in the way that just based on what they were saying, reading between the lines, it's a full club culture that needs a rebuild. When we look at John, you almost have to isolate the first and second team. And I think Jason Hernandez even came out and said something along those lines of there was progress made on the first and second team, and you start to see some of that come to fruition. So there was progress made there. So I don't know. It's tough to say, but yes, I understand the speculation, and I understand, why people could read it that way as well. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
fault anyone for that. The way that I personally interpret it was more so, um, when you talk about a football club, it's a lot more than the first team. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
needs kind of that reshuffling.
Okay, I gotta respond to Jason's screaming into the void right now. I think that I'm glow because I think this investigation is going to show a lot of bad on John. Hate to burst your bubble, Jason. The investigation is pretty much over as per recent tweets. They ain't getting called to testify. It's going to die the quick and inglorious
No, there's
death
still
that
the
it
CSA
deserved.
There's still the Canadian Soccer investigation, right?
You
It's
know,
just not
it's
going
gonna
to the
be.
government.
It's just
that's
not.
all.
It's not going to the government. And then this other one, Jason, and I don't mean to harp on you, but guys, as TSC fans, we should know this by now. As new front office come in, they want their own people. This investigation will be an excuse to get John out the door. Again, stop hanging your hat on the investigation, and also you'd have to buy him out. And I think that, considering all the buyouts that everybody's entertaining on the below the line costs for this club, the last thing that this regime also wants to entertain is a buyout of John Herdman's contract. Remember, he's paid out through 2026. I think they're bigger fish to fry. I do think that there's some disappointment in the higher ups with Herdman. I think he's a charismatic guy. The charisma only got us so far. They realize there's trouble in the head house. He needs help. They don't believe the $1 million 10,000-watt smile as much as they did anymore. So they're sending a message, but I don't think his seat is as hot as the Jason Jardins of the chat would suggest.
No, I think you'd be nuts to get rid of him now. Like I think you need to be able to provide him with a team that is really his. And look,
Within reason.
Like, you're not going to get everybody, but like, you've got these players that are going to be out. Just to read some of them out, Prince Owosu, DeAndre Kerr, Brandon Cervania, Kosi Thompson, Alonzo Cuello, Kobe Franklin, Tyrese Spicer, Kevin Long, Shane O'Neill, Ami Mabika, Greg Radising, Luka Gavrin, Luke Singh, right? They're all up. Their contracts are all up for club options right now, right? And obviously, Jason Hernandez last week said that we should be hearing something this week in terms of sort of concrete decisions on who's going to have their options picked up and who's not. Mm-hmm. But I think that, and we'll have another show where we sort of say, hey, who's gonna be here, who's not gonna be here.
100%.
And we'll probably talk about when the announcement comes out, but.
And
revisit our picks
at the
beginning of the
year. But I think that when you think about this idea of rebuild or culture reset, and you think about identity, the manager's got to be a part of that. Can't be the only part of that, and I think that's to your point earlier.
That's kind of what I was
problem.
saying too.
Yeah. Right. Like it's got to be a part. And if he as the manager can impart a part of that philosophy onto specifically probably the first team, but maybe even a little bit of the academy, then you start to have something that I think can be healthy, right? Because I there are bits of John Herdman that I think work. And I think we saw a bit of that at the first sort of between the beginning of the season and let's call it May, the end of May. We really saw that in action. Then you start getting injuries and call-ups, and that sort of then the bottom falls out. But if you can get him sort of players that are going to fit that ethos in that model and fit this culture in the team, then I think he could be fairly judged on that. And if he fails at that point, then yeah, 100%,
100%,
hot seat, 100%. But
I think it's
you got to see.
I think it's unfair to judge a coach when so much of your roster is uncoachable, especially at the higher end of the roster. I think
Okay,
it's
so let's
unfair.
talk about it. Let's talk about it a bit because Lorenzo Insigne was brought up directly. I know we kind of danced around it a little bit in this pod, but he, I mean, directly was asked, "Are you considering a buyout for Lorenzo Insigne?" Essentially, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's essentially what was asked of Keith Pelly, of Jason Hernandez. You know,
Of,
in terms
of
what are you
Jonathan
gonna do?
Osorio and
Yeah,
John
right. Like,
Herdman,
what are you gonna
of
do?
the
What,
people at the door? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like, what are you gonna do with Lorenzo specifically? And Keith Pelly's answer was interesting, which is they will sit down with him and they will go through all the options. A little bit of, you know, again, speak by not necessarily tipping your hand one way or the other. But it does sound like they might be looking for a way out. And what way out that is, we don't know. What I read from the answer is that a buyout is definitely in the card.
I think
it's not something that they're going to
was
take off the
made
table.
Explicit. I think that's the whole point of that answer.
I think that it's on the table. I don't know if they go down that route. I really don't know if they go down the route. I personally think that, and I agree with you, Mike. Like, you can't have a rebuild if the guy's back. It doesn't work. It just
we tried
does
that this
not
year.
Work. Yeah, it doesn't work. And I think and then look, we can, whenever this happens, whatever decision's made on him, we can have a whole podcast on what happened with the signing and who's kind of.
I'll bring the champagne.
Is it right? Because I don't think it's just the player's fault. But
it will not be prosecco. It will be champagne. Proper champagne.
But you know, in that case, it's the question is, you know, how soon can you get it done? Because I think the sooner you have a definitive answer on that, the sooner this club can move on. Right? If this drags for a while, this is the question that's going to be hanging over you throughout the off season until it gets done. Right? I don't think you want to run into a Josie situation where you're just like hanging on to Josie, and then the week before the season starts, okay, we release him. Like that it just hangs over you. I think the earlier you can get clarity on this, that's when you can really go in the market and say, okay, this is the plan and this is how we're going to execute these signings to get our team where we need to be.
Really need that time machine.
I'm glad you brought up Josie because that's such an important point here. A buyout isn't as simple as, you know, choosing to buy out a player, right? You have to negotiate with that player. You have to come to terms, come to an agreement on a termination of the contract, of a buyout of a whatever number. The reason why Josie Altidore was on TFC's books was because of that. The agreement that they came up with, right?
Yeah.
And I think Josie was on TFC's books up until this season.
Last year. Just up to the beginning of this year. Yeah.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. So, if TFC wants to cut a check, $15 million a year for the next 2 seasons, then sure. Yeah, I'm sure they can make a buyout happen.
Buy him out tomorrow. Yep.
So 30 million, probably. Maybe slightly less because I think
John Molinaro calculated to be about 23 million.
Yeah, because it's a year and a half. Yeah, not 2 full years. Yeah. So if they want to do that, you probably can find a way to buy out Lorenzo Insigne. He becomes $23 million richer, and he doesn't have to put up with Toronto FC any longer. And I'm sure he won't lose sleep over that.
Nope.
However, you know, that's a very steep number to cut. And look, if the Lorenzo Insigne's value go up this year to where other clubs might be more interested? I don't think so. Did Lorenzo Insigne become closer to leaving Toronto under his own terms? I don't think so.
Nope.
Like, why would he at this point of his career walk away from that kind of money?
Never happening.
Listen, I relate this to I'm obviously a big Leafs fan, so I relate to the Mitch Marner situation in Toronto, right? You have a no trade clause and you're Mitch Marner. What way could you pressure Mitch Marner to use his no trade clause? This was a conversation that was happening throughout the offseason as there was a lot of rumors that, the Leafs might trade Mitch Marner. Well, you go to Mitch Marner and tell him, regardless of the fact you have a no trade clause, we don't want you back. We don't want you here. If you come here, you're going to, sit, for example. Are they willing to play hardball with Lorenzo Insigne? Could you find a different way to convince him to leave? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the type of conversations that Keith Pelly and Jason Hernandez and anyone else who's in that room are going to have with Lorenzo Insigne and
The
his
nuclear option.
agent. And again, doing that though, is there any coming back from that
It's
relationship?
the nuclear option.
Well, it's not just
You're-
that relationship. That goes around, right?
Mhm.
In terms of other DPs you may want to sign, right?
Sure.
And look,
Uh-oh. I'm not
right-
afraid of that.
Well,
Those
yeah,
guys-
I think everyone understands the situation that TFC are into. Like, would you not be a
yeah.
little sympathetic? with-
yes and no. Like I think you do have to be careful about those kind of things, about how you handle those relationships. And yes,
I
okay,
no longer care.
with the
There's
player.
so little. I so
Fair,
less I
fair,
give in that situation.
fair,
Yeah.
but I mean,
I
like,
hear
if-
you, but yeah.
Yeah, but if the thing is you don't want to eat $23 million, which I think it's a fine price to pay, right? Like
Mhm.
it's a price you got to pay, but
Yep.
I think you're spending
pay the
it
troll toll.
regardless. You're spending it regardless, right? Whether you spend it on him leaving or him staying, and like you said, Mike, them ultimating him by staying on the bench, or you're not going, you're only playing cup games, you're training with the kids, or
So-
whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
You're still paying that money.
So the
Right.
follow up to that, though, the Mike is okay. You buy out Lorenzo Insigne. What's next? Do you go out and spend another $10 million on another DP?
Well, I think they're thinking about doing that. They could do that on a U22 player, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you could spend
Yeah.
that on a U22 player, a top level U22 player. But I think
But they.
I
could do
think
that
you think
with
about
that.
it, because Keith Pelly didn't
Mm.
mention there's money there. There's money to be spent. Like there's this
Sure.
idea that
But this is
TFC
lighting it on
is
fire.
broke.
This is not spending money. This is officially lighting it on fire.
Oh, I don't
And
think
then-
so. I
and
don't
then
I don't
the-
necessarily think so. Right? Like I
mean-
don't.
Distraction.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're looking at, okay, you think about this. I've been mapping this in my mind over the last little bit, right? There's
I
a
love
couple of
it.
things
I
you got to
love it.
think about, right? So one layer is Toronto FC, okay, and we're the sickos. We're all here about TFC. We want to see this team win. We want to see them get back to where we arguably think it should be, right? So that's one level. Then you got to think about, and I hate to bring it up in a fan show, but the business. Okay, you got to think about that too, and you got to think about the World Cup that's coming, and that is a factor in this. Like, if you think Toronto FC is not factoring in, or MLSC is not
They've
factoring
said it
in the
100
World Cup,
zillion times. 100%.
they are factoring in hosting the World Cup. This is a factor in player signing and how they're trying to make this team competitive by then. So if you think about it, okay, yes, $23.5 million, let's call it that, is a lot of money. It is. It's a lot of money for an MLS club team to eat. It would probably be a record. It'd by far be a record buyout, right? If you have to buy them out. But you're going to spend that money on probably whatever U22 player you're going to have to spend. You're going to have to spend at least a couple million between transfer
At
fee
least.
and contract, and you can do 4 of them. Okay, so think about that. So if you do that, even if you're doing $1 or $2 million fees, already you're starting to think about, $4 to $8 million, probably a little bit more, because probably those fees are going to go up. The young players from
all
clubs,
4 players. Yeah.
right? So let's just call it $10 to $15 million in players for 4 new players, right? Between transfers and salary, right? That's how it gets
Well,
calculated.
salary's
right?
capped for a U22 player.
True,
So
but you
yeah,
still
they-
got
you-
you guys still got to count
you
it a
eat
bit,
the
right? Like if you're
overage,
going to get a
yeah.
decent U22 player, you're probably looking at a couple million in transfer fee.
You're not
right?
paying him $600,000.
transfer fee, yeah.
Yeah, right. Then that counts. That is a part of
Well-
something you have to calculate a bit, right? In terms of your budget spend. I'm not talking about the salary cap, just a budget spend.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got to do that. Then you're thinking, okay, yeah, you're probably going to go out and try to find another DP, at least one, right, to complement Federico, okay, because you want to keep Federico at this point. So what does that look like? Does it have to be? It's not going to be 15. You're not going to pay $15 million to another DP again. Like, that's not happening.
No,
So-
I think it's Fede is the maximum. What we're paying Fede would be the maximum.
I don't even think you need to go up to Fede spending.
I agree. I
But,
think
like,
it's
right?
half
Like, there's
that.
enough quality out there that you can get somebody pretty, like, again, you could rattle off names. And actually, I think Jason Hernandez did that in the press conference. I think he rattled off some names, right? Of players that you can think of that are way below what both of them are spending and the kind of contributions they're bringing to their teams, right?
You said names, but I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So from that
3.5
perspective,
mil. Yeah.
that spend swings. You're spending that money no matter what, right?
So,
Like,
but you're spending that money on top of on
top
top
of
it.
that.
So it's double the amount of money.
Exactly.
Right.
That
That's
23
where I'm
million
getting at.
can't be it can't be tax
But
credited
you're still,
away.
but you're
It
still
can't be
having to pay.
rounding
But you
error
still
away.
have to pay Lorenzo anyway.
You do.
You
do.
still got to pay him anyway, whether he's
do.
there or not. And
No,
the question is,
exactly.
like, are you fine with paying $50 million to sit on the bench?
That has to
and
be part of
harm
the
the
calculus
culture.
when you sign the guy in the first place. And if you didn't
But
do that
we
due
can go back in
diligence,
the past, but we can't.
yeah.
Like,
It's
they
how-
clearly
it's how you
that
move
wasn't the
forward.
plan.
It's how you move
so
forward.
I mean, $23 million is $23 million, and we're gonna find out
Yeah.
how much cojones we have, and we're gonna find out by virtue of that just what kind of a toxic influence this player was in all facets. You know, is it worth 23 million to wash our hands of the stank of Il Magnifico, or are we gonna suffer through another half season where, because everyone agrees this rebuild isn't a full rebuild if that guy is still in the clubhouse.
Yep.
Simple as.
So then
simple
what?
as.
Let me-
You're
Well,
just
then
grinding
you
metal.
You have realistically one of two routes. Either you amicably agree something mutually, and maybe you can not pay
which
as
is
much.
$23 million. It's,
Well, no, it might mean you pay a little bit less. Maybe he takes less. Maybe he leaves money on the table, right? He could leave money on the table. Maybe
monkeys
take
will
one
fly
lump
out.
sum
I
and
will
go.
birth monkeys from my
I'm just
asshole
telling you,
before
there's,
that
but yes,
happens,
but there's
yeah.
two. That's one way, or the other way
Yeah.
is the buyout option, which you still need to agree something. You're right, Michael, but like in the end of the day, they could be like, well, we'll give you the full salary, buy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's it. If he can't be around, there's no point to me in sitting him on the bench or telling him he's going to be a role player, or say you're going to train with the kids and still pay him $50 million a year. Like that. That to me is lighting your money on fire.
You're right. No,
but you're saving. I mean, again,
What are you saving? What are you realistic? We're talking about Rogers Communications
Nothing.
and MLSE board. You're literally saving $7
So
million. What is that?
That's exactly what I'm
Yeah.
going to say. So let me cap this conversation on by saying this is
yeah, please do.
if TFC do buy out Lorenzo Insigne, I think it's a massive statement from Keith Pelly from MLSE about how much they're backing Toronto FC. Because I think
yes, sir.
I think when he was appointed, there was question marks, right? There was question marks about how important is Toronto FC in the MLSE portfolio. How serious are they going to take them now that some of the people who were there and did take Toronto FC really seriously are no longer there? So I think Keith Pelly's press conference gave fans a lot of confidence about how seriously MLSE is going to continue to take Toronto FC and how
Agreed.
seriously he's going to take
100%.
Toronto FC. And then if he goes ahead and makes this, investment into getting rid of a player who, like, we all agreed on at this point has to go if you want to rebuild the culture, would also put his money where his mouth is and put MLSE's money where their mouth is. And I think that's an important kind of distinction.
100%. Talk is cheap. Is it is all that talk worth $23.5 million? We're about to find out.
I think we'll find out relatively soon, too.
Who had the better Instagram social media mea culpa?
So
was it Berna's or his mini me that wrote in
I mean, like, can we think about the spot Lorenzo's in? Like, if after Berna puts that out, like, Lorenzo's screwed. He's screwed.
Yeah, nothing he's gonna say. Nothing he's gonna say is gonna make.
You can put
Can we agree that, like, I want to enjoy this, considering that it's pain. I want to enjoy all the little Intercini nonsense that's going on. Like,
I like
Lorenzo
Fedez.
putting that.
I'll say that. I like
Fedez was all right. I mean, it was no Michael Bradley after the 2016 loss in penalties, right? It was no Sebastian Giovinco to the Players Tribune, right? Those were the big guys. Those were the ones I wanted. But yeah,
Mike, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Because this is something that was not that eye-popping based on some of the other stuff that got said, but it did catch my attention, and it was about the supporters section and Keith Pelly saying he wants to triple the size of the supporter group. If you're Keith Pelly, because we've had this conversation on this show about how the supporters group when first got started, which was about 15 years ago now. People have aged and people have gotten older. If you're Keith Pelly, aside from putting out a product on the field that's, a winning product and a product that fans want to get behind, how would you accomplish that? And is that possible to triple the size of supporters groups? Like, what needs to happen in order for
Win.
And well, aside from that, right, Jeff?
Well, yeah,
Aside from
let's
that, I don't think it's
yeah,
that easy.
let's just yeah. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. Of course, it's possible.
$100 checks. Yeah.
It's possible. What would it take? That's a low question, because I think, look, just putting my own personal sort of biases a bit aside here, right? Like, I think the supporter culture is moving towards more of an ultra style, and or at least that's what the prevailing feeling is. And the question then becomes, okay, if that's where it's going, and if the club has been promising general admission standing area in the South End for nigh ongoing 10 maybe like 7-8 years, like at least since the first time I saw a plan for general admission and standing and everybody together was probably like 2014-15 maybe. Yeah, I know some people are saying like, hey, redesign the South and it would bring safe standing to it. That's not coming, or at least
I got a great idea. I got a great idea how to run a business. Let's spend the most money on the people that pay the least to arrive at the stadium.
Well,
Let's
do
that.
No.
Yeah.
Jeff, I think you're not thinking that's not the way to think about it, right? Because they have to renovate the stadium at some point anyway, right, for the World Cup.
I
right?
agree.
So if it means being able to create the atmosphere that they want, because in the end, that atmosphere drives more people to come to the stadium, right? So 100%. That's just a cynical business way of looking at it. Can you grow it? Yes, you can. Like, I don't know if you can grow it in a sense that you're gonna like me personally. If I could do it all over again, I don't know if I'd have like specific supporter groups, like named support. Like, I think you would have an end of people who support the club and are going to make noise and go wild for their club.
It's very
instead of
interesting
necessarily
what you just
having
said.
like an affiliation to a specific group. Like, like in the sense that, and I get it, like I'm a part of it. I helped create a part of it. But if I look back at it now, like I do feel that it sometimes is exclusionary for some people. It makes people not feel like it's easy for them to express their support. And and sorry, let me just continue. Just like in terms of just that, I think that like general admission could help with that, in a sense that I think it can kind of spread things out a little bit more, and people can feel a little bit more like they can be a part of chanting and singing and being a part of the atmosphere. And if you really want to get really into it, it's like a concert, right? You want to be in the pit, you can go down in the pit. But just know what you're getting into when you go down into the pit, right? If you don't want to be in the pit, you still want to have a vibe and a good time, and you want to make noise, you still want to be active, you can stand in different parts, right? And I think at the moment, just based on the way that the stadium is constructed, it's hard. It's hard, right? Because groups can't really grow, not just from a number perspective, like they're locked in to a section, and there's only so many seats, and you can only get so many members in, and all that kind of stuff. And then even if you go to general admission and say you build that out in the South End, I think in the end of the day, like, you need to have a consensus on generally what is the style of support that you're going to do. And I'm not going to open the can of worms of what I think it should be. Frankly, it doesn't matter what I think. But, if you're going to do it, then you're going to have an idea of what, and again, it goes to club identity in a lot of ways. That identity that they identify and hopefully works and becomes winning football, and long-term winning football, then can permeate out to the stands, and the stands can then determine, hey, this is the kind of culture we're going to bring to help you push that. And right now, I think that's what you're seeing in the South End. It's just confusion on what is this team and what am I cheering for? What am the product on the field that I see every week? What is it? And I think that it shows, right? Like I think you still have good support from the supporter groups, but the numbers that you need to really create that critical kind of mass that you, and again, I don't want to necessarily compare clubs because every situation's different, right? Like Miami just listed the supporter shield. Technically, their supporter group was built by the club, right? Like, so that's why the supporters didn't actually have the supporter shield. It got, Cincinnati was nice enough to give it to the front office of
Beckham.
Miami, but
Yeah,
they didn't have
David
to.
Beckham. Yeah.
Right? Like they didn't have to, right? It technically it's supposed to go to an affiliated supporter group within the ISC. And again, I don't want to get into the ISC and what that is,
Oh,
but
my God.
but I think, to build that critical mass, you do need to win. It brings it brings people off the bench and from a casual perspective to really get in and really invest.
Totally.
And I think you need to think about, if you can clearly articulate what this club is about, then those values get imprinted into the supporters, and the supporters will then go and embody that through support in the stands. And that is the issue here from a supporter perspective. It's just there is no culture, and because you don't know what it is. Like, think about this. When Michael Bradley left, obviously retired, Josie leaves, Seba comes back in the last game of the season. I know it's an ambassador role, but the reason they resonate so much, the reason that, you do a legend banner for Drew Moore and people get excited about it, and it's Drew Moore, right? He's not a superstar or anything like that. It's because those guys embodied a type of philosophy of how TFC was going to play. You knew every day those teams were going out to win, and they had a winning mentality. You just don't have that right now. And I think that's hard for people to get behind because you just don't know what it is you're supporting, if that makes sense.
No, it makes so much of TFC's language in the last little while has been step 1, this is what we want. Step 2, step 3, profit. The is really important, right? Like, it's like, yeah, we want this. How are you going to do it? I don't know. Identity. Like, sorry, like, one, winning solves everything. The other thing is we should really have my buddy Gavin, who you both met, on here to discuss this, because he's got a really interesting take about this, because he's like, look, you can't escape who you are, right? Soccer culture in North America is a bunch of expats whose parents were religious about it, that we're all picking and choosing. We're all cherry picking what we like and what we don't want, in how we support, in how we're fandoms, in all aspects, right? And so, I asked him directly, I'm like, what's the preference? Like, Gillingham doesn't have official, his local club doesn't have official supporters groups. They don't get perks from the club. They don't get all of these special privileges. But he goes, as my knee-jerk reaction would be to say the TFC way is stupid, but also there's something charming about it, right? People get to sort of find their tribe, and we're also, Gillingham's 100 years older than TFC is. I had this same conversation over and over again when I was at Benfica, and people are like, well, why doesn't TFC work the way Benfica does? Give us a couple 100 years and we'll see what happens.
Well, the roots of how a club gets built is completely different. Like, when your supporters can make votes for a president, so a little different than.
So I think it's about understanding that, like, everything's constantly in flux, and in addition to winning, TFC can't say this is what we want without offering some kind of it always comes back to, people are like, why isn't the South End unified? There's a capo stand over there, there's a capo stand over there, without understanding what the Doppler effect is. It's not like we can just choose to all have the same sound and meter in a stadium of 30,000 people, where physics is responsible for how sound travels. Like, it's never as easy as you think it is, but sometimes it's never as hard as you think it is. Right. And so I do think the solution is town halls, realizing that, yeah, we've maybe, with the supporters, we've maybe gone a little bit to the extreme where now everything's become tribal and there's sort of intercity fighting. The club is going to need to dictate terms and create new boundaries so that we can start fresh, because just saying we want more of this is going to suck. More of what's happening in the South End is a solution that nobody else wants. A unified South End, where we've taken the lessons of the first years of the club's history and applied it in a constructive way to the future, is is something that I'd like to do, but it just doesn't happen organically. It cannot happen organically. The club created a bit of this mess. It's going to have to step into to iron out some of it as well.
Yeah, so like the two things that I take away from all of it is one, I think I started off the conversation, aside from putting on a winning a product on the field that fans can get behind, get excited behind. I think that's number one, right? That's the whole foundation that we've talked about this entire episode, and playing style and all of that. The second thing is, and I guess hearing you guys speak about this and even some of the comments, it's um, inclusivity is a big term, and it doesn't just mean like how do I get into this sports group or what. It's just more so, how do I understand it?
Mhm.
How does someone who's going to BMO Field, you know, do research on the supporters groups or do research on how to become a supporter, or those who are interested, at least, how can they get involved, kind of thing. And there's not one
There never should be
unified.
one way to do anything. Also, I
No,
mean,
there shouldn't
Fair,
be
but
because
one.
then
there's
yeah,
not like, I don't know, there's not much transparency with all of it, and it's not
I
easily
agree.
accessible. And like the other thing is, like, okay, like people are talking about the Apple TV deal. Like that's not easily accessible either,
True.
right? It's general admission, right? You have to have a ticket to go there. It's not easily accessible, although it kind of is general admission anyways.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's
low
not
key.
always easily accessible. So like when I say inclusivity, I don't just mean like I think one party or other parties are keeping people out. I just think there's a lack of transparency in the entire process, and not a lack, or I guess a lack of cohesion throughout it all.
Yeah, I think the thing I would say is that I I don't think it should come down to somebody who wants to support the club having to research supporter groups. It should be you have a love of Toronto FC and you want to express that by
Mhm.
singing, by chanting. You
Mhm.
should be able to easily access where supporters
Yeah.
congregate and not feel like you've got to. And again, I am
Know the
guilty of
secret
this because I
handshake.
helped to
Yeah,
create part of this, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But feel like you need to sign a blood oath, like
It's a
basically
catch
like
22 because
you're getting gang
Mhm.
initiated to join a supporter group. I'm not saying it's like that for supporter groups, but you know what I mean? Like
For sure.
you shouldn't have to necessarily feel like I got to go out and rep like it's funny because I've been made fun of sometimes because I go in the South End and like I won't wear King stuff, or sometimes I'll wear TFC stuff, and people are like, "Well, don't you support your supporter groups?" No, I support my club. I am a member of a supporters group, 100%, and the people that I've been able to create a community with, I love. But that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean that I'm just supporting like Kings of
Yeah.
the North aren't on there are 12 Kings of the North players playing on the pitch, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
in the end of the day, it's Toronto FC I'm supporting. And I think people who feel like they can do that and not necessarily have to feel like they need to sign a blood pact with Kings or
There
with any
has
other
to be
supporter
room for
groups.
those people, or
Right,
we're
and
doing it
I
wrong.
think I
Yeah.
think right now, just the way that the sections are, and just the history of how groups have made it, just people, and I know it. People talk about it all the time. I ask people when they don't join groups, I'm like, why do you do this? It's just like I don't feel like I want to join a group. I want to support, and I want to, and I want to do it. But I also feel like I don't want to feel like I'm joining a gang,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
like, and that's the thing that needs to change a bit. And I'm not saying support groups have to
That's a
go
great
away.
point.
Yeah, I'm not saying they have to go away, but because
No.
they have a very specific purpose, and I think you need them in a sense of organization. Now, it can't be a complete free for all. You do have to have some organization when you're talking about
Yeah.
displays and
Somebody
flags and
wearing
things
big
like
boy
that. Like,
pants, and it
well,
can't be one
you
of
gotta.
us.
I mean,
It's the
like,
club.
hey, look,
Yeah.
man, if you want the flags and you want the banners and you want the tifos and all that, and you're like, why don't TFC do that? Or why do the sport groups? You know how much money that costs? Think about organization you have to have, especially when your
Yeah.
club
Commitment.
isn't paying for
Yeah.
it, because a lot of these
Give
clubs
us
that
give
you
us
see in
money.
MLS
We'll
get
give you our
them paid
Venmo.
by their
Yeah.
clubs, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
So that's
Yeah.
that's the other thing, right? Is like, okay, you don't want it to feel like a, because I think even without knowing, fans can get the impression that, like Mike put it, it feels like a blood oath when joining a supporters group.
Mhm.
But there's also that commitment that you need from fan bases, and the reason why there is that blood oath and why there is that, commitment that you need is because of how much work goes in to being a supporter and how much
Makes you
dedication there
feel
is to that.
special. It makes
So
you want
it's
to get your money's worth, and
for
then therefore
sure,
you're a gatekeeper because humanity, we're human
for sure.
beings, and we like feeling special. It's a catch-22.
So I don't know if I don't have a solution. I think it's a very interesting and fascinating conversation,
Mm.
especially because when I heard that from Keith Pelly, I thought of, a conversation that we had a few months back now at this point about, the supporters groups and, how people are getting older and how, maybe obviously, the sports culture isn't the same as where it was when the club first launched. So how do you triple that? And I was wondering if, what kind of
Well,
answers
I think part of the answer to it is that you make those people who are feeling older still feel like they can be there.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Right? Like you feel like
100%. That's
I
such
gotta
a good
retire
point.
and I gotta go to 212
And you
now
don't put
'cause,
them
like
and you don't put them in an impossible decision, right? Like none of us, if we bought tickets in 2007, front row, south side, are giving up those tickets because we aged out of it. Like, are you crazy?
sure.
No. Like,
Oh, a lot of people
so
have.
yeah, there. I mean,
lot of people
because there's a lot of nice people, but there's a lot of people that wouldn't because we're human beings, and of course we want our special cookies and stuff like that. So the solution is general admission and safe standing and more of a town hall feeling, and being okay with the fact that some people's support is cosplay Red Star Belgrade of their own imaginations and other people isn't, and there has to be room for all of that because it there has to be. I'm not I feel bad even deriding that Red Star Belgrade cosplay in this context because who the hell am I? Like, you got to be able to do whatever the hell you want as long as it doesn't impugn on other people. Something was lost along the way, and when the club comes out and says we want to make it bigger, well, it's kind of getting bigger anyway. It's not going to happen on your timeline, right? Like, those people, those red patch boys that are aging out are bringing their kids, and maybe their kids aren't going to be red patch boys now because they're 8, but when they're 16 fine. Like, you know what I mean? So, like, it's not gonna happen by waving a magic wand, but it is happening. I mean, that's how Benfica becomes Benfica. That's how Arsenal became Arsenal. The first fans brought their kids, who begat Job, who begat Abraham, who begat the knee bones connected to the hip bone. But it cannot be done with the wave of a magic wand, which brings us right back to dough, which is what we've discussed this whole show. Like, the word salad is, we want it now, we don't know how. Step 3, it's going to be there. Well, the how is really effing important, and right now it's all word salad, and the proof will be in the pudding.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Open up a can of worms. The last thing I'll say, just
Yeah.
give us GA. Just give us GA.
The last thing
Yeah.
you're going to say is how much you like The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, just so that I can interrupt
You
you
got
again.
the know when to hold 'em. Thank you for tuning into another Toronto Till I Die episode. We really appreciate it. I think we may take a little bit of a break. We'll sort of figure it out between the three of us.
I got to move
until we do
cities,
it.
but
yeah,
we're
exactly.
definitely gonna
Right.
be
So
back
there's stuff,
soon,
there's
yeah.
life stuff happening for all of us. But continue to follow us on all the socials. Search Toronto Till I Die, and you can find us on all the social platforms. If you are listening to this on the podcast version, please, thank you for downloading. Leave a review, 5 stars on Spotify.
I'm
Obviously,
also
if you're
framing
on
that one.
YouTube. If you're watching this on
Love you,
YouTube right
Jason.
now, please subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications when we do our shows. Again, big help. Also, if you are now watching this on Twitter, hey, we got a check mark. We paid for that shit. Yeah. But you can now watch us on Twitter again. Thank you for doing that. Like, retweet. Obviously, that also helps people find the show. Gents, any last words before we jump
Get us
off?
up to 500 subs on YouTube, so I stop crying every time I
What are
look
we
at how
at
close we are. We're so close. Just somebody create fake accounts, please. Please, I want some of that YouTube chatter.
Go hit that subscribe button for us,
Yeah.
please. But
Yes,
no, that's a good point.
please.
We're back on Twitter. I think is nice. So if you are watching us for first time or maybe first time in a while, we always go live on YouTube. So make sure that you do hit that subscribe button, please. We need Jeff
Please.
happy.
Mhm.
Yes,
we need
please.
Jeff happy.
I'm unhappy about everything.
Absolutely. All right, guys. For Jeffrey P. Nesker and Michael Singh, I'm Mike Newell. We will see you next time. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.